What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have Tropical Storm Phillipe that is out in the Atlantic Ocean right now. Looks pretty lopsided as a tropical storm. There's a lot of shear impacting it. We have Invest 91L continuing to organize and develop in the main development region. We have a new area of interest by the NHC tagged in the Gulf of Mexico. Over here, you can see there's a bit of rotation going on with that system, and we have a lot of thunderstorm activity today across parts of the Caribbean. We'll have to keep an eye on all of that for you, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue into this video. So here's what we have going on for you today, ladies and gentlemen. We have Phillipe that is currently out in the Atlantic Ocean, has winds of 50 miles per hour, minimum central pressure of 1,001 millibars. Its current location is 17.3 degrees north and 45.5 degrees west. Excuse me. The movement is west at 11 knots or 13 miles per hour. Here's the latest we have. Here's the latest that we have for the public advisory. Tropical storm force winds extend outward 115 miles from the center at the current time. So we'll have to keep a very close eye on it. It's moving at 280 degrees. Minimum central pressure, once again, is 1,000 millibars. It is 1,160 miles east of the northern Leeward Islands, so this isn't looking like really any threat to land at this current time. Here's what we have going on with the cone right here. The cone has this thing starting to make that turn towards the west-northwest in the next couple of days or so, and then it actually is forecast to stall out a little bit in that part of the Atlantic, which is pretty interesting. That's telling me there's a bit of a collapse in the steering currents as we get into further and further of that. Tropical storm force winds mainly on the eastern side, so it's pretty lopsided. You can easily also see it on satellite. It's also quite lopsided from there as well. We'll have to keep a very close eye on it as time continues to go on. Here's the discussion we have. It is expected to remain a 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm over the next 5 days, primarily due to the wind shear that is currently impacting Phillipe as of right now. Here's what they're saying about that. Phillipe is currently experiencing about 20 to 25 knots of southwesterly vertical wind shear. Both GFS and European-based ships models show vertical wind shear increasing even more during the next few days. These hostile winds and dry air environment should cause Phillipe to continue to struggle throughout the forecast period. There is some spread of guidance of a couple of models of slight strengthening and several of the models showing slight weakening. Based on the guidance and expected continued shear, the new forecast is lower than the previous one and shows no change in strength in the next several days. But the thing I'm really interested in is this whole track right here. They're forecasting this to kind of stall out in this part of the Atlantic Ocean right there, which that's telling me that one of two things is happening. One, the steering currents have pretty much collapsed by the time it gets to Friday or Saturday. It's just going to kind of stall out there until either a trough or a ridge picks up on it. Or two, it could potentially be potentially making a turn more towards the west, as we've seen models of a high-pressure system start to build up off the coast of Newfoundland and then potentially push that further to the west. We'll keep an eye on it for the time being. But once again, a 50-mile-per-hour Phillipe out here in the Atlantic, pretty lopsided, something to keep an eye on. Now we're going to go ahead and get to the areas of interest. Here's the first one. We have a 10% chance of formation in the next 7 days. A trough of low pressure producing disorganized shower activity over portions of the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. Development, if any, of this system is expected to be slow to occur over the next day or two while it moves slowly westward. The disturbance is expected to move into unfavorable environmental conditions by the middle of the week, ending its chances for development 10% chance of formation in the next 7 days, currently north of the Yucatan Peninsula as it moves into the western Gulf of Mexico into a bigger sheared environment at this current time. So this is definitely something we have to keep an eye on. There have been a couple of models of this potentially developing. However, if it wants to do it, it's going to have to do it in the next day or so. So we'll keep a very close eye on it, because either way, even if it doesn't develop, it's still going to be a pretty significant rain threat for those of you on the east coast of Mexico, near Veracruz, near that surrounding area, maybe even into Mexico City and Pueblo. We'll have to keep an eye on it, but this is the one area I'm keeping an eye on too. Here's what we have. We have an 80% chance of formation in the next 7 days as of right now. 30% chance in the next 48 hours. This is Invest 91L. An area of low pressure located several hundred miles southwest of the Cabo Verde Islands continues to produce disorganized showers and thunderstorms. Environmental conditions are forecast to be conducive for additional development, and a tropical depression is likely to form within the next few days as the system moves west-northwestward across the central tropical Atlantic. Once again, we have a 30% chance of formation in the next 48 hours and 80% in the next 7 days. So that's the situation we have going on with all these disturbances from the National Hurricane Center. Conditions continue to be good for development as time continues to go on. And as we get into this active weather period, be sure to check out my friends at Prestige Weather Consulting. They do one-on-one individual weather consulting catered to your local area. For more information, you can find a link to their website in the description down below. And be sure to use code PREDICTOR for 50% off your first month. So that's what we have going on. Be sure to check out Prestige Weather. Shout out to them. They've been really helping me out with these videos. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and show you out with the European models right here. We're going to go ahead and show you that. Here's what we have with the European going into the 0Z of September 25th, which is today. The European is showing this area of this area of interest, which is Phillipe, and then this area of interest, which is 91L, kind of struggling to develop in this environment. And the European is what's really causing the IHC to have some doubts on the track of this, because there's a high pressure system building off the coast of New Brunswick and Quebec that could potentially push this thing further to the west. However, the wind shear could also potentially kill this whole thing off. And then you have this area of interest out here that is 91L starting to organize and develop, strengthen potentially into a hurricane, and it continues to move further to the west as this high pressure system continues. However, there is a bit of a trough that is right here. If we can go ahead and show you the 500 millibar height anomalies, there is a trough that is right here that is kind of blocking this ridge from coming and continuing to push this further to the west. And the forecasts, according to the European as of right now, has this thing going out to sea, mainly thanks to this trough that is going on right there. However, if that trough is a lot weaker than anticipated, and we hope that does not happen, this thing could be a pretty significant threat to the Antilles. And this thing gets down to a 946 millibar system as this thing continues through the Atlantic Ocean, which is 91L. So this is something we definitely need to keep an eye on as time continues to go on. Next model run we have is the GFS, ladies and gentlemen. The GFS has this system right here, which is Phillipe, starting to organize. It's still potentially calling forward some sort of development and maybe some sort of strengthening. However, it is anticipated that 91L could potentially kind of devolve into a bit of a Fujiwara effect, according to the GFS, and kind of merge with that system right there. Either way, by its peak, it's going to get down to like Category 1 strength, according to the GFS, primarily due to that wind shear. Honestly, I'm keeping it at 50 miles per hour, primarily due to the wind shear that's there, and we'll show you that in just a second. But down the road, you see that whole tropical system that's over there that starts to potentially organize and develop off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. And keep in mind, this is like 3 days out, so we'll have to pay attention to it. There's been a lot of thunderstorm activity in parts of the Caribbean over here, so we'll have to pay attention to that to see if what that does, if that starts to show some signs of rotation and signs of a low pressure system building up. Because if that happens and the conditions where it is in the Caribbean, that's bad news. So as we can continue with the GFS, basically this thing kind of meanders in the Yucatan. There's not really that much going on until 384 hours out, but even at that point, take it with a massive grain of salt. It's very unreliable by that point. Here's what we have with the CMC model. CMC has this thing continuing to stagnate, which is Phillipe, and then starts to have that turning a little bit more out to sea. However, then the high pressure system starts to kick in and starts to push this further and further to the west, and then it begins a Fujiwara effect with with 91L, which could potentially be Rena as our next named storm. We'll have to keep a very close eye on that as time continues to go on. And the CMC is also showing a lot of thunderstorm activity across the Caribbean. We'll have to pay attention to it as we continue to progress through time. Now here's the NavGem model right here. The NavGem is showing a similar situation to the GFS. The NavGem is having this push out to sea, but then it starts to stall quite a bit as there's a weakening of steering currents as they've pretty much collapsed. 91L goes through a Fujiwara effect into the NavGem, and this thing is a Category 2 hurricane that continues to push further and further to the northeast at that time. So that's what we have with the NavGem. As for other storms that could could lurk in the Caribbean. We're going to have to wait and see in the next couple of weeks what happens as we get into October in that transition from Cape Verde systems to more Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico systems. So we'll have to pay very, very close attention to that. Next model we're going to show you is the Icon. Here's the Icon model we have right here. Icon is a similar situation to the European and CMC. So there's actually pretty much of a split in the models, with the Euro, the Icon, and the CMC calling for a more westward direction with Phillipe, and the GFS and NavGem calling for a more like out to sea direction with Phillipe. So we'll have to see how that model split continues to play out as time continues to go on. But in the meantime, we have this area of interest 91L that starts to organize and develop. And if this trough weakens enough, this could mean some very bad news for the Antilles, according to what the Icon is showing us. So that's what we have with the models for you guys. Now we're going to go ahead and show you the conditions that all this stuff really has to work with. So we're going to start with global sea temperatures across the board. Very warm waters, 28 plus degrees Celsius or 82 plus degree Fahrenheit waters across the Atlantic Ocean, where all three of these systems are. In fact, in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Sea, it's 30 plus degrees Celsius in a huge chunk of it. So we need to also keep that in mind as well. So there is plenty of moisture, plenty of fuel for this for anything to develop if it's in the right conditions. So here's the warm water. We are also seeing increasingly warm water off the coast of Africa right here, which is pretty alarming right there, because let's say we have another tropical wave come off and the conditions are just right. It capitalizes off all this water that's over here. We could see a tropical system develop a lot earlier than anticipated, so we'll have to keep a very close eye on all of this as time continues to progress. Next thing we're showing you is the ocean heat content, or OHC for short. OHC continues to increase across much of the Caribbean Sea, which, in my opinion, honestly, is very alarming to see, primarily because as we shift from September into October, we start seeing more storms starting to originate in the Caribbean Sea. And based off of all the fuel and all the nuclear fuel this stuff has in the Caribbean, if one system goes through here and starts to tap off all this water, that's very bad news. That's easily a sign of rapid intensification based off the ocean heat content. We're packing 200 plus OHC in a lot of these areas across parts of the Caribbean. So if anything happens, if we see a wave come all the way through Africa, doesn't develop until it enters the Caribbean, well, it has the right ingredients now to do that. Last thing we're showing you is the wind shear as we continue to move through this. Here's the wind shear where Phillipe is. Yeah, there's like 30 to 40 knots of wind shear to the north of it, 20 to 25 near the center of circulation. That's why it's so lopsided. And we also have where the thunderstorm activity is in the Caribbean. We're also looking at like 30 knots of wind shear. So right now I'm not terribly concerned just yet. But one thing I'm actually more concerned about is the wind shear over the last 12 hours I've noticed. Here's where we're at from 12 hours ago. Heck, even from 24 hours ago. This was a much more unfavorable environment. I don't think many of the models really picked up on this. This is where we were 21 hours ago, and as you can see, the wind shear pretty much collapsed across much of the Gulf of Mexico. So that could potentially give that area of interest that's off the Yucatan Peninsula more time to organize and develop and potentially strengthen into something pretty serious, as it is through a lot of great conditions. There's plenty of warm water, plenty of ocean heat content, and now there's less and less wind shear for to work. So we'll keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're closing the video out right here. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us make more videos like these. The goal of this channel is to get more people engaged with weather. Be sure to check out my friends at Prestige Weather Consulting. Remember, you're getting 50% off your first month if you use code PREDICTOR. With that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.